Yeah.
Excellent reporting from Brandon Marcello. We spent the first hour talking about it, the scheduling stuff coming to a vote next week. So we might as well talk to the guy that did it. Brandon, thank you so much for your time on the Farm Bureau Guest Line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team. Let's just start here. Very detailed, really good reporting from you. Let me start with a question, though. Were you surprised that Nick Saban, of all people, knowing his history of begging for more difficult schedules, is now championing keeping it at 8?
I think he's posturing a little bit to maybe bend the SEC to his will, and that he just does not like the idea of having to play LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee every single season, every year. The problem is there's really not much room to maneuver with that. And if you ask him to drop LSU off the schedule, that's probably a no-go because that's one of the biggest games of the year. Same with Tennessee, obviously. That's a historic rivalry game, and they're not touching the Iron Bowl. It's just, I think Nick Saban is, I hate to say whining, but he tends to do this. He finds something to kind of get on every spring meetings, and for now, this is it. What's going to be interesting is what's the tenor of that meeting room like when the coaches enter there this week, and do they kind of side with Saban and go, you know what, finally we got a big boy program saying, hey, we don't want this 9-game schedule. Maybe we can convince others to come back around to the 8-game schedule. That's maybe some of the thinking there. But, in the end, it just makes so much more sense to go to 9 games. But the fact that Saban's leaving that door open, and for that matter, has convinced Greg Byrne, his athletics director, to be more open about it going into their meetings, that's substantial.
How much of this, Brandon, is, 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think Saban has as big an issue with it. But now that Tennessee is good again and looks like they're going to be good for a while, how much is that playing into this?
I think it's interesting because, Saban, you talked to him like 3-4 years ago, he liked 10-game schedules, in the SEC, let alone 9-game schedules. I also think that they've also toughened up their non-conference schedule in the future going forward, almost like a farewell tour that they have put together for Nick Saban with the likes of West Virginia on there, Ohio State, playing 2 Power 5 opponents in the non-conference schedule, several times coming up. I think by far Alabama and Florida have the toughest non-conference schedules in the future of the SEC, whether it's an 8-game schedule or 9-game conference schedule. And I think that maybe that's changed his thinking a little bit too, because then like these games have been scheduled out for the last several years. Things have changed quite a bit. You're talking about Alabama playing 2 Power 5 opponents in a non-conference schedule every year between 2024 and 2034. That's really an insane pull there. For as many jokes as Alabama's gotten in the past about playing an FCS opponent the week before the Iron Bowl or whatever, they still have one of the toughest schedules in all of college football, and for that matter, it's about to get tougher.
And then, there's that financial aspect of this too, Brandon, because they're going to have to buy out some of these Power 5 games. I assume they will not keep a 10th Power 5 game, especially schools like Mississippi State, Ole Miss. How much money does it take on average if you want to buy somebody out at this late juncture? Say somebody like from Mississippi State, Arizona State, and the next 2 seasons.
It's very difficult. It depends on the contract. Every contract is different across the country, but most of these buyouts are in the, 6 figures, obviously, approaching maybe the full buyout of a game's value, which is usually $1 million, $1.5 million. And if you're sitting there like, say, Missouri, which actually supports the 9-game schedule, they have the most non-conference games scheduled out throughout the next, decade plus. They've got 8 non-conference games that they would have to move or straight up cancel, most likely cancel. And you're talking easily, several $1 million, if not approaching close to, $7 or $8 million if they have to pay the full buyout worth of those contracts. Of course, there's maneuvering to be had there. You're probably not going to want to cancel the bigger games, some of the Power 5 games you've got on your schedule. Maybe you could just go cancel your FCS game or your lower tier Group of 5 game, which will have a lower buyout usually. But we're talking, across the SEC with 38 games, you're easily talking about probably at least $15 million total off the top of my head. And you would hope if you're an SEC team that you counter that and more with extra money that ESPN is going to pay the SEC. But that's the other issue with all this. Based off my reporting, the SEC has not had a final number presented to them by ESPN of, hey, here's what we'll pay you for this extra inventory provided with these extra conference games starting in 2024. And at the very least, athletic directors and administrators across the SEC have not heard what that is. They're hoping to hear final numbers when they meet in Destin next week. A lot of these schools, especially Kentucky, have been using that as ammunition in their fight against going to 9 games, going, well, you don't even know what we're going to get paid for this. We're not committing to this unless we know the final details. And for that matter, if ESPN's going to lowball us, then we're not going to play ball. And that's a big concern right now, considering the media industry as it is right now. ESPN is cutting back on payouts right now. They've got to prepare for other contract negotiations with the NBA coming up, F1, UFC, and then also, as I mentioned, Disney and ESPN, they are cutting back thousands of jobs. And, they were in the running for the Pac-12 Tier 1 rights, but it's apparently pulled out of that because they're not all too interested in paying the type of money for that. So you're asking ESPN to give up more money to the SEC, which I'm sure in the end they would do, but are you actually going to get the full value of what you probably could get in a quote-unquote normal year? We're in a very bad time in the media industry.
Visiting with Brandon Marcello of 24/7 Sports. Brandon, you reported that one of the teams that was on the fence was Ole Miss. To your knowledge, is it as simple as they're waiting on that number before they come to an idea of where they would lean on this deal? And part two of that question is, what does the vote have to be unanimous? What is the number that they have to get, the number of yeses, in order to pass a scheduling model one way or the other?
Yeah, first off, Auburn, Ole Miss, and Tennessee are kind of sitting on the fence there. I think Auburn will go one way or the other no matter what. Tennessee is a bit unpredictable at the moment, but I think they are leaning toward 9 because they obviously want to continue playing Alabama. I think Ole Miss for a while had been leaning toward 8, but is a little bit more open to the 9 game schedule idea. But I think all three of those are kind of coin flips. They'll just side with whatever the majority is. And when it comes to voting time, if they'd say, hey, we got to vote this week, which is what everybody's expecting, all the administrators are expecting next week, all they need is a majority of votes. So, but the problem is the SEC historically, and you've heard this all before. Heck, remember when Texas and OU was joining the conference 2 years ago, they want a unanimous vote. They didn't want Texas A&M being the lone dissenter. Even if they were voicing it in the room, they would always have to say, listen, we got to make this unanimous. So it's going to pass. You might as well vote yes. So that's what will happen with this, whether it's an 8-game or 9-game situation. And remember, they'll need to have a vote either way, because even if they do stick with 8 games, they're going to change the whole model. They're going to go with that one permanent rival and 7 rotating teams, and also abolish the divisions. So there's a lot of stuff they got to work through with all this. And if they were to delay a vote once again this spring, obviously they'd have to get something done, I think, this summer. But that would just show you that, again, that this is moving maybe more and more toward them sticking with an 8-game model and perhaps kicking the can down the road. I don't think this would kill the 9-game idea, but I do think it would delay it at least 2 years. And that might be the smart thing to do. Talking to several ADs across the SEC, that's something that was pitched to me about maybe we just hold off on this for a couple of years. We go with the 8-game model. This buys us some time to play some of these non-conference games we've already scheduled for the first 2 years. And it also provides us more time to see how the college football playoff shakes out in those first 2 years, and how just strong our schedule is and how it fits into the playoff, and whether we're getting as many teams into that 12-team playoff as we hope with an 8-game schedule, or maybe we'd be better fit with a 9-game schedule starting in 2026.
We got 60 seconds, Brandon. When we talk about this next week, what are we talking about? 8-game, 9-game, or will they kick the can down the road? Your prediction.
I don't know. If Cooler heads prevail and they're smart about it, they'll go 9 games. They should have said 9 games last year. Texas and OU have been on board with 9 games the entire time. 7 schools right now are firmly in the 9-game camp, and that could easily go to 8 or 9, and then you have a majority. And if there's a majority, then you just vote for it and go with 9 games. Pay the payouts, cancel those other non-conference games that you have to. They can afford it. They'll get enough money from ESPN. Everybody will be happy. And in the long run, it'll help the SEC. They should go with 9 games, vote on it next week.
Brandon, excellent reporting. Thank you